Senator Rubio, Donald Trump agrees with President Obama in his decision to re-engage diplomatically in Cuba. The majority of Americans seem to agree with that as well. So why are President Obama, Donald Trump, and the majority of Americans wrong?
Well, I would love the relationship between Cuba and the United States to change, but it will require Cuba to change, at least its government. Today, it has not. The fact of the matter is that after these changes were made, there are now millions and hundreds of millions of dollars that will flow to the Castro regime. It will now allow them to become set permanent and in stone. They will now be able to carry out a transition where the military continues to run the country there. They'll put a puppet figure forward as their new president, and nothing will change for the Cuban people. There has not been a single democratic opening, not a single change on the island in human rights. In fact, things are worse than they were before this opening. The only thing that's changed as a result of this opening is that now the Cuban government has more sources of money from which to build out their repressive apparatus and maintain themselves there permanently. And we ask nothing in return. Compare that to the changes that were required in Burma. And by no means is Burma a perfect country. But at least when there was a democratic opening to Burma, they were required to make some democratic openings. When there was a diplomatic opening, it required democratic opening. And today, the former minority party is now the majority party in their legislative body. He asks nothing in return, and we are getting nothing in return. And Cuba and its regime remains an anti-American communist dictatorship, helped North Korea evade UN sanctions, is harboring fugitives of American justice, including people stealing our Medicare money and moving back to Cuba, all in exchange for nothing.
Mr. Trump, you've said the concept of opening Cuba is fine. You've said the concept of opening Cuba is fine. Why do you agree with President Obama and disagree with what Senator Rubio just said?
I don't really agree with President Obama. I think I'm somewhere in the middle. What I want a much better deal to be made, because right now Cuba is making, as usual with our country, we don't make good deals. We don't have our right people negotiating. We have people that don't have a clue. As an example, I heard recently where the threat was made that they want reparations for years of abuse by the United States, and nobody's talking about it, and they'll end up signing a deal, and then we'll get sued for $400 billion or $1 trillion. All that stuff has to be agreed to now. We don't want to get sued after the deal is made. So I don't agree with President Obama. I do agree that something should take place. After 50 years, it's enough time, folks. But we have to make a good deal, and we have to get rid of all the litigation that's going to happen. This was just a little story, but it was a big story to me, because they said, oh, here we go. We make a deal, then we get sued for a tremendous amount of money for reparations. So I want to do something, but it's got to be done intelligently. We have to make a good deal.
Senator Rubio, I know you want to get in, but just to be clear, Mr. Trump, are you saying that if you were president, you would continue the diplomatic relations, or would you reverse them? I
would want to make a good deal. I would want to make a strong, solid, good deal, because right now, everything is in Cuba's favor. Right now, everything, every single aspect of this deal is in Cuba's favor. It's the same way as the Iran deal. We never walked, all we do is keep giving. We give and give.
Mr. Trump, just to be clear, there is an embassy that you would have to decide whether it would be open or whether you would close it. Which would it be? In Havana.
I would probably have the embassy closed until such time as a really good deal was made and struck by the United States.
All right, first of all, the embassy is the former consulate. It's the same building, so it could just go back to being called a consulate. We don't have to close it that way. Second of all, I don't know where Cuba's going to sue us, but if they sue us in a court in Miami, they're going to lose. Third, on the issue of a good deal, I know what the good deal is. I'll tell you what the good deal now is already codified. Here's a good deal. Cuba has free elections. Cuba stops putting people in jail for speaking out. Cuba has freedom of the press. Cuba kicks out the Russians from Lourdes and kicks out this Chinese listening station in Bejucal. Cuba stops helping North Korea invade UN sanctions. Cuba takes all of those fugitives of American justice, including that cop killer from New Jersey, and send her back to the United States and to jail where she belongs. And you know what? Then we can have a relationship with Cuba. That's a good deal.
Thank you, Senator Rubio. Senator Cruz, if you become president... Senator Cruz, if you become president, would you reverse course and once again break diplomatic relations with Cuba?
Yes, I would. And, you know, I think this exchange actually highlights a real choice for Republican primary voters. When it comes to foreign policy, do you want to continue on the same basic trajectory as the last 7 years of the Obama foreign policy? when it comes to these deals, Cuba and Iran, they were negotiated by Hillary Clinton and John Kerry. There's a real difference between us. Donald supported Hillary Clinton and John Kerry. And what he said right now is that he agrees in principle with what they're doing. The only thing he thinks is that they should negotiate a little bit better deals. They should be more effective. I have a fundamental disagreement, and I think most Republicans and most Americans do, that we shouldn't be allowing billions of dollars to go to nations that hate us, to go to Cuba, to go to Iran, and to let them use those billions of dollars to try to murder us.
Well, if Ted was listening, he would have heard me say something very similar. I said we would not do the deal unless it was going to be a very good deal for us. And I think I said it loud, and I think I said it very clear. And I think after 50 years, and I have many friends, I own many properties in Miami, many, and I have many people that know and they feel exactly the way I do. Make a deal, it would be great, but it's got to be a great deal for the United States, not a bad deal for the United States. As far as Iran is concerned, I would have never made that deal. That is one of the worst deals ever made by this country. It is a disaster. So for Ted to say, I agree with that deal, I mean, it's a staple in my speeches that may be the worst single deal I've ever seen negotiated. So don't try and put it on me like it's wonderful, like I love it.
Senator Cruz, your response?
Well, look, I'll point out, first of all, it is a matter of public record that Donald supported John Kerry in 2004 over George W. Bush, and he supported Hillary Clinton, gave her 2 checks in a presidential campaign in 2008, and indeed, once she was Secretary of State, he described her as one of the greatest Secretary of States in history. And, you know, the point on the Iran deal, his answer to everything is if only someone smarter were in government, things would be better. No, we don't just need smarter people in government. We need leaders that are protecting American interests. And when it comes to Iran, Donald has said he would leave the agreement in place and try to renegotiate it, giving the Ayatollah Khamenei over $100 billion. That reflects you do not understand the radical Islamic terrorist that is the Ayatollah that wants to murder us. We need a commander-in-chief that understands our enemies, understands and doesn't give them billions of dollars to threaten our safety and security.
I was against the giving of the money at all cost. I said don't negotiate at all until you get the prisoners back. If the prisoners don't come back early, 3 years ago, one of the longest negotiations I've ever seen, by the way. If they don't come back early, I was saying don't negotiate. They come back early. What you do is you take it back and you say either give us the prisoners or we double up the sanctions. And what we should have done is doubled up the sanctions and made a much better deal, because that deal is a disaster. Ted, the money is largely gone because of incompetent and very poor negotiators. But that money, the $150 billion, is largely gone and already spent everywhere but the United States.
Let's refocus this back on Cuba. Governor Kasich, a pair of entrepreneurs from Alabama and North Carolina have just received approval to build the first U.S. factory in Cuba, making tractors for small farms. This is a direct result of President Obama's new policy in Cuba that we've been talking about. If you are elected president, would you encourage more U.S. companies to do business like that in Cuba?
No, I wouldn't. Listen, I think the problem with the administration, if you talk to our friends around the world, they say, what is America doing? You know, you don't support us. We can't figure out where you are. You won't arm the freedom fighters in Ukraine. We let the Russians trump up some excuse on the business of, Russian-speaking people. You had a red line in Syria. You walked away from it. You refused to fund the Syrian rebels. You undercut Egypt, and we ended up with the Muslim Brotherhood for a while. And then we turn our back at Netanyahu when he comes to Congress to talk about his concerns of the Iranian deal. Look, I know in human nature sometimes there's a sense that you make better with your enemies than you do with your friends. And you know what happens when you do that? You make a terrible mistake. You need to support your friends. You need to hold your enemies out here, and you need to negotiate tough deals. And the fact is, they need to understand who we are. The Chinese understand. They don't own the South China Sea. They have to stop hacking everything we have in this country, or we'll take out their systems. We will arm the Ukrainians so that they have lethal defensive aid. We will destroy ISIS. And Mr. Putin, you better understand, you're either with us or you're against us. We're not rattling a sword. You're not our enemy, but we're not going to put up with this nonsense any longer. And a strong America is what the entire world is begging for. Where has America gone is what many of our allies say around the world. I'm president. They're going to know exactly where we are because we're coming back.
Thank you, Governor. While we're discussing issues